There's a silent lie that's been instilled in most people's minds from a young age. The idea that getting rich is extremely difficult, almost impossible, reserved only for geniuses, heirs, or special people. And perhaps this is one of the most dangerous manipulations ever created. Because while you believe that wealth is unattainable, you continue to accept a limited life without even realizing it. Machiavelli understood something that almost no one dares to say aloud. The masses are not controlled only by force. They are controlled by the beliefs they accept without question. And perhaps the greatest of these is this: the belief that hard work automatically leads to prosperity. But if that were true, millions of exhausted people would already be millionaires. What makes someone rich isn't just effort. It's perception, it's strategy, it's understanding how human behavior really works. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. While most people spend their lives waiting for security, clarity, and approval, some ordinary people learn to solve problems, communicate value, and act before they feel ready. And that's when something almost forbidden begins to appear. Getting rich might be much simpler than you've been taught. Not necessarily comfortable, not necessarily fast, but absurdly possible for those who stop playing the emotional game of hesitation. Because think about it honestly, how many times have you had an idea, a talent, or an opportunity in your hands, but backed down? How many times have you convinced yourself that it wasn't the right time? How many times have you watched less intelligent, less prepared, and even less talented people grow simply because they started earlier? It's better to be feared than loved. The world rarely rewards those who wait for permission. It rewards those who learn to act despite fear. And in this video, you will understand why so many people remain financially trapped, even living in the era with the most opportunities in history, while others build wealth practically from scratch, using simple principles that almost no one notices. Because in the end, maybe the real secret was never about working harder. Maybe it was about seeing what most people have been conditioned to ignore. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. Many people complicate wealth because they grew up hearing that money is a kind of prize reserved for geniuses, heirs, or chosen people. But Machiavelli already understood something that almost no one dares to admit. Life rarely rewards those who merely deserve it. It rewards those who learn to act strategically. And that's the point that scares so many people. Getting rich isn't necessarily difficult. What's difficult is enduring the psychological discomfort of doing what most people avoid. Because getting rich requires decisions based on real human nature, not on pretty ideals. A person spends years studying, planning, waiting for the perfect moment, while someone less prepared simply starts. And it's curious to observe this. Sometimes, the person who became a millionaire wasn't the smartest in the room. They were just the first one who agreed to sell something, record a video, start a business, or risk looking ridiculous. Hesitation destroys more futures than a lack of talent. Some people spend 5 years thinking about starting a YouTube channel, while another person, with a bad camera and terrible lighting, starts today and learns along the way. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The world rewards movement, not perfection. And deep down, almost no one wants to admit it because it would destroy the comfortable excuse of eternal waiting. The funny thing is that many people treat wealth as if it were a mystical entity, when in reality, it functions much more like a game of human patterns. Observe someone who became rich by building a personal brand, for example. They usually didn't start out knowing everything about copywriting, traffic, sales, or positioning. They learned while making mistakes in ads, while making videos with low views, while listening to people saying that it had no future. And here comes a truth that Machiavelli would understand perfectly. It's better to be feared than loved, especially for the fear of acting, because most people live trying to avoid social judgment. They want approval before results. They want security before experience. They want certainty before the first step. But wealth rarely arises in emotionally secure environments. It usually emerges when someone decides to act before feeling confident. Does the end justify the means? In many cases, the means is precisely enduring the initial discomfort without giving up at the third obstacle. And then the person realizes something almost irritating. A large part of the money in the world is circulating in the hands of ordinary people who have simply learned to solve common problems consistently. Nothing magical, nothing cinematic, only strategic repetition and constant adaptability. And perhaps that's where many people get lost, because they expect the path to seem extraordinary. But wealth usually arises from simple actions taken for a sufficient amount of time. A young man starts by editing videos for a small client. Then he learns about traffic. Then he understands positioning. Then he creates his own product. When he realizes it, he has built something great on top of small decisions ignored by most. Virtue and fortune go hand in hand. Luck helps, of course. But luck usually visits those who were already in motion. Those who were already trying. Those who were already creating connections, making mistakes in offers, testing possibilities. And that's when the game changes completely, because the person begins to realize that perhaps they never needed more capacity. Perhaps they only needed to see value in what they already possess. And curiously, there is almost always something in their life that could already be used in a completely different way. There's a very dangerous illusion that traps millions of people in a permanent state of stagnation. The idea that they're not ready yet. As if they were missing one more course, one more certification, one more camera, one more perfect opportunity sent by the universe in premium packaging. But in practice, much wealth is born precisely from something extremely simple, repackaging common knowledge in a useful and emotionally appealing way. Machiavelli deeply understood the power of the appearance of virtue. And this also applies to business, because it's not enough to possess knowledge. You need to know how to present that knowledge in a way that the market can understand, desire, and consume. Sometimes a man spends 10 years learning something at work, but never realizes that it can become consulting, content, training, or a digital product. A barber understands men's aesthetics better than many influencers. A medical student understands study organization better than hundreds of coaches. A mother who learned to save money at home might be able to teach basic finance better than experts full of difficult words. The value already exists. The problem is that most people have been conditioned to ignore their own experience because it seems too normal. And here's something curious. The market rarely pays more for the most complex knowledge. It pays for the clearest knowledge. A nutritionist might know everything about cellular metabolism, but another professional with less theory and better communication builds a millionaire audience by explaining nutrition in a simple way. Decisions based on real human nature. People buy clarity. They buy perceived transformation. They buy someone who can translate difficulty into practical simplicity. And that's why so many people underestimate what they already possess. Because they look at their own experience with excessive familiarity. The person thinks, everyone knows this. No, not everyone knows, and even when they do, almost no one can teach it usefully. The difference between poverty and wealth sometimes isn't in the content, it's in the framing. A personal trainer stops selling hours and creates a method called Project 90 Days. A video editor transforms technical skills into mentorship on retention and viral marketing. A lawyer stops speaking legalese and starts explaining rights in a human way on social media. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. The market rewards those who organize value in an understandable way. The most interesting thing is realizing that many modern fortunes were born exactly like this. Ordinary people took something they already knew how to do and simply changed the packaging, the positioning, and the target audience. And that's where a detail that few realize comes in. Wealth isn't just about creation. Often, it's about redistributing attention. The person doesn't invent something new. They simply communicate something old better. And that changes everything, because it breaks that childish belief that getting rich depends on absurd genius. It doesn't. It depends on strategic perception, calculated use of force. A man who learns storytelling sells more than someone with an impeccable resume and awkward communication. A person who understands social media transforms simple experiences into digital authority. And little by little, without realizing it, they begin to enter a curious territory. They understand that clarity doesn't appear before action, because the more they try to transform what they already have, the more they begin to discover possibilities that were previously invisible. There's a silent trap that destroys more dreams than failure, lack of money, or absence of talent: the obsessive need to be certain before starting. Many people spend years trying to discover their purpose, when in reality, purpose almost never appears sitting on a couch waiting to be found. It emerges in movement. It arises while the person tests, makes mistakes, improvises, and adapts. Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature. Those who expect absolute stability usually miss the timing of opportunity. Virtù and fortuna go hand in hand precisely because luck favors those already in the field. And this is unsettling because it destroys that comfortable fantasy of perfect planning. Someone wants to start a business, but first wants to understand everything about the market: traffic, sales, branding, networking, and positioning. The result? They never start. Meanwhile, someone less prepared creates a simple page, sells the first bad product anyway, learns from their mistakes, and gains real experience. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. Clarity is not an initial condition. It is a consequence of friction with reality. The path only appears for those who accept walking without seeing everything. And perhaps that's one of the biggest differences between ordinary people and people who build consistent wealth. Ordinary people try to eliminate fear before acting. Strategic people learn to act even when feeling fear. It's better to be feared than loved, even by your own sabotaging brain, because the human mind creates extremely sophisticated excuses to avoid discomfort. It's not the right time yet. I need to learn more. I'll start next month. But the market doesn't reward intention. It rewards execution. A young man creates a YouTube channel and the first videos are terrible. But by the 10th video, he learns retention. By the 30th, he learns storytelling. By the 50th, he understands thumbnails. And by the 100th, he realizes he's become a completely different person from the insecure person who started. Growth came after action, not before. And this applies to almost everything. A salesperson improves by selling. A communicator improves by communicating. An entrepreneur improves by making bad decisions and learning quickly. Their own loyal armies. Practical experience creates a confidence that no theory can manufacture. And the most ironic thing is that many of the initial fears naturally disappear after the person finally gets into the game. But there's a detail here that almost no one notices. Movement creates invisible opportunities. When someone starts to act, they begin to find people, ideas, and connections that simply wouldn't exist in a state of paralysis. A video posted today can generate an unexpected contact 6 months from now. A skill learned out of curiosity can become income years later. A small project can open gigantic doors, constant adaptability. The problem is that those who are standing still never see these possibilities because they only appear to those who are already in motion. And that's exactly where many old beliefs begin to conflict with reality. Because the person realizes that perhaps the real blockage was never a lack of opportunity. Perhaps it was the invisible conditioning that taught them to doubt their own potential even before trying. Few people realize it, but many financial beliefs are instilled in the mind during childhood, even before the person understands how the world really works. And the most dangerous thing about all this is that these ideas arrive disguised as wisdom. Money doesn't bring happiness. Rich people are all dishonest. Those born poor die poor. Money doesn't grow on trees. Seemingly innocent phrases, but which, repeated for years, end up becoming internal commands. Machiavelli would probably see this as one of the most sophisticated forms of psychological control, because when someone believes that wealth is something distant, dangerous, or morally wrong, they begin to sabotage any opportunity before even trying. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The truth is that many people don't fail because of incapacity. They fail because they carry an emotional conflict with prosperity. They want to earn money, but at the same time associate wealth with guilt, arrogance, or corruption. And no one can build something great while feeling ashamed of their own desire to grow. The mind freezes, the person hesitates, and then she calls it a lack of opportunity, when in reality it's emotional conditioning disguised as prudence. The most curious thing is that this conditioning appears in the small things of everyday life. One person sees someone driving an expensive car and immediately says, "They must have done something wrong." Another sees someone growing rapidly on social media and thinks, "That won't last." Do you see the pattern? The brain tries to protect the old identity by attacking what threatens to expand it. Decisions based on real human nature. Because if that person succeeded, then maybe you could too. And that's uncomfortable. It means admitting that maybe you've spent years living below your true potential. Does the end justify the means? In many cases, the system's cruelest means is convincing people to accept invisible limitations without realizing it. And the more someone grows up hearing limiting ideas, the more they normalize a small life. The person begins to believe that working to exhaustion is absolute virtue, that resting is laziness, that charging high prices is exploitation, that prospering quickly is suspicious. And meanwhile, individuals who are strategically more emotionally free build businesses, brands, and wealth in silence. Calculated use of force. They understand that money is not moral identity. It's an expansion tool, and perhaps that's where everything starts to change. When a person finally realizes that many opinions about money never came from people who are truly financially free. This detail completely changes the game, because they begin to question who programmed their beliefs. A financially exhausted father, teachers who never ventured into entrepreneurship, frustrated people trying to justify their own stagnation. Better to be feared than loved. Sometimes growing requires disappointing old expectations. It requires abandoning the constant need for social approval. And this creates a powerful internal rupture. Because the individual begins to perceive something almost forbidden. Wealth may not be about access, it may be about psychological permission. And when this invisible barrier begins to fall, another inevitable question appears in their mind. If money doesn't depend solely on effort, then what really makes a business generate true wealth? One of the biggest mental shifts someone can experience happens when they realize that the market doesn't reward suffering, it rewards utility. This is hard to accept at first, because almost everyone was raised within an emotional logic of exchange. If I work hard, I will be rewarded. But business doesn't work that way. The customer doesn't pay because you woke up early, stayed up all night, or worked until you were exhausted. They pay because something in their life improved. Machiavelli perfectly understood this cold dynamic of reality. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The business world is less sentimental than most would like. A restaurant doesn't grow because the owner loves to cook. It grows because it delivers an experience that people want to repeat. A video goes viral not because the creator deserves it, but because it managed to capture attention. A product sells because it solves pain, saves time, generates pleasure, or increases status. And when someone understands this deeply, they stop acting like an emotional employee of their own effort. Because there are people working 12 hours a day without generating relevant value, and there are people solving a specific problem so efficiently that they earn in a week what others take months to receive. The problem is that many people confuse busyness with productivity. They spend the whole day tired, but don't produce a proportional impact. And this creates a dangerous trap. The person feels they deserve more, but the market doesn't work with subjective merit. It works with perceived value, decisions based on real human nature. Think of someone who learns copywriting, for example. A single good campaign can generate millions for a company. The market pays dearly for this because the impact is gigantic. Now compare that to someone who only performs repetitive tasks without generating clear transformation. It's not cruelty, it's economic logic. Does the end justify the means? In business, the end is usually simple: solving relevant problems. The more urgent, expensive, or emotional the problem, the more money circulates around it. That's why areas like health, aesthetics, finance, relationships, and status constantly move billions. They directly address deep human pain. And those who learn to alleviate this pain legitimately create something extremely valuable: their own loyal armies. Satisfied customers become an audience, reputation, and organic distribution. Results start to generate more results. And perhaps it's precisely at this point that many people begin to see the game differently, because they realize that getting rich doesn't just depend on working hard, but on choosing the right problems to solve. A man can spend years selling his time by the hour, or he can build something that continues to help people even while he sleeps. Constant adaptability. And this completely changes how he looks at skills, opportunities, and even his own future. Because the question stops being, how much am I working, and becomes, what transformation am I creating? And when this question truly enters someone's mind, they inevitably begin to realize that there are very different ways to make money. Some limited by the clock, others capable of growing at a completely different speed. If someone were to dismantle almost all modern great fortunes down to their most basic structure, they would find something surprisingly simple: a real problem, a proven solution, and a large group of people wanting to resolve that pain immediately. It seems obvious when stated like that, but almost no one acts with that clarity, because many people try to create businesses based on their own ego, not on human reality. Machiavelli would see this as strategic naivete. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The market doesn't move because something is interesting. It moves because people are emotionally pressured by urgent pains. A man suffering from baldness seeks a solution. A woman tired of debt seeks financial relief. An entrepreneur trying to sell more seeks attention. Money always flows towards resolving human tension, and the more intense that tension, the more valuable the solution becomes. That's why gigantic businesses often emerge in emotionally charged markets: health, money, appearance, relationships, productivity, status, and survival. It's not a coincidence, it's real human nature working before everyone's eyes. The curious thing is that many people try to invent sophisticated solutions for problems that nobody really feels, and then they fail. Meanwhile, someone who understands human behavior creates something seemingly simple and builds a money-making machine. Take delivery apps, for example. They didn't solve quantum physics, they solved convenience. One click and food arrives at the door. The result? Billions moved. Does the end justify the means? In business, the end is usually to alleviate pain, reduce effort, or accelerate pleasure. And those who understand this begin to see the world differently. They start to see problems as hidden opportunities. An editor realizes that companies don't know how to capture attention in the first few seconds of videos. A student realizes that students have difficulty memorizing content. A personal trainer realizes that people give up because the plans are too complex. Calculated use of force. Instead of trying to embrace everything, the strategist learns to attack specific pain points with clear solutions. And the more specific they become, the stronger their communication becomes. Because the client feels, this person understands exactly what I'm going through. But there's another detail that separates small gains from consistent wealth: audience size. Solving a rare problem might generate some money. Solving a common problem on a large scale completely changes the game. Your own loyal armies. Think about how many people want to lose weight, make money, improve self-esteem, or increase productivity. Millions share similar struggles daily. And when someone creates a simple, repeatable, and easy-to-understand solution for a huge group, the scale starts to appear. Constant adaptability. That's when the individual stops thinking only as a worker and starts thinking as a strategist. They understand that wealth doesn't just come from individual effort. It comes from the ability to multiply impact on entire groups of people. And when this perception matures, a new inevitable question begins to arise. Is there a way to generate value without directly exchanging hours for money? There comes a point in almost every ambitious person's life when they realize an uncomfortable truth. Selling time is one of the most limited ways to build wealth. No matter how talented someone is, the day still only has 24 hours. And as long as income depends exclusively on that person's physical presence or direct effort, there will always be an invisible ceiling controlling growth. Machiavelli would understand this quickly because he saw power through leverage and strategy, not just brute force. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. A lawyer can earn well by serving clients individually, but remains tied to their own schedule. A video editor trades hours for projects. A personal trainer sells blocks of time. And there's nothing wrong with that at the beginning. In fact, many modern financial empires were born precisely from providing services. The problem arises when someone stays in that position forever, without transforming experience into a scalable asset, because there comes a time when working more ceases to be the solution. Energy drops, time shortens, and growth slows down. It is at this point that strategically intelligent people begin to realize something powerful. Knowledge can be packaged, and when that happens, the game completely changes. A designer who previously served 10 clients starts teaching other designers through mentorship. A doctor transforms years of learning into a preparatory course. A content creator organizes their experience into a simple framework and sells it to thousands of people simultaneously. Does the end justify the means? In many cases, the smartest means is to build something that continues to function without exclusively depending on your constant presence. Calculated use of force. Products create scale because they allow you to multiply value without multiplying effort in the same proportion. An e-book can be sold 1,000 times. A recorded course continues to generate revenue while the person sleeps. A recurring subscription transforms knowledge into a predictable flow. And the most interesting thing is that a good portion of the people who today seem financially free don't necessarily work more than others. They have simply learned to create systems that work with them. Their own loyal armies. Platforms, audience, products, community, and reputation begin to function as assets that expand reach without requiring continuous physical presence. But there's a silent trap here. Many people think that scale means abandoning quality or becoming an impersonal machine. No. The greatest digital fortunes usually arise precisely from the ability to transform human experience into organized solutions, decisions based on real human nature. A course works because someone wants to accelerate learning. A community grows because people want belonging. A program sells because it reduces pain and shortens the path. And little by little, the individual begins to realize something extremely powerful. Wealth doesn't depend only on how much they work, but on how their identity perceives possibilities. Because there are people who continue to define themselves as someone who sells hours. And there are people who begin to see themselves as creators of systems, assets, and influence. Better to be feared than loved. Sometimes, financial transformation begins when someone silently changes the way they talk about themselves. Few people realize how much the words they use daily are silently shaping their own reality. And no, this isn't some internet magic trick. It's pure human behavior. The way someone talks about themselves directly influences what they consider possible to attempt. Machiavelli deeply understood the power of narrative because he knew that identity is constructed both by internal perception and by external image, the appearance of virtue. A man who constantly repeats, "I'm terrible with money," begins to act like someone incapable of prospering. A woman who constantly says, "This isn't for people like us," creates invisible emotional limits around her own life. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Language doesn't just describe reality. It conditions behavior, and repeated behavior becomes destiny. Observe financially unhindered people. They tend to use expansive language, not because they ignore risks, but because they allow themselves to consider possibilities. Instead of, "This will never work," they say, "How could this work?" Instead of, "I don't have money," they ask, "How can I generate more value?" It seems like a small detail. It isn't. This change completely alters the type of decisions someone makes over time. The problem is that most people grew up surrounded by limiting discourses. Pessimistic phrases become so common that they begin to seem intelligent. The individual learns that dreaming big is arrogance, that wanting to prosper is greed, that trying something new is irresponsibility, and without realizing it, they begin to use words that sabotage their own expansion, decisions based on real human nature. The brain seeks coherence with the verbal identity built daily. If someone repeats for years that they weren't born to be entrepreneurs, they will find emotional justifications to remain stagnant. Does the end justify the means? In this case, the most dangerous means is the silent repetition of beliefs that seem innocent because they shape risk perception, courage, and financial self-esteem. A simple example: 2 content creators receive few views on their first videos. The first says, "I'm not cut out for this." The second thinks, "I'm still learning." Do you see the difference? One transforms temporary difficulty into a permanent identity. The other sees a process, constant adaptability. Strategically strong people understand that words need to serve growth, not self-punishment. And perhaps that's exactly why wealth often begins internally before appearing externally. Because at some point, a person stops seeing themselves as a victim of circumstances and begins to see themselves as someone capable of learning, testing, and evolving. Better to be feared than loved. Often, changing one's identity means disappointing old versions of oneself. It means abandoning comfortable discourses that previously served as emotional protection, and this creates a silent but extremely powerful transformation. Little by little, the individual begins to realize that the way they speak directly influences what they are willing to try, demand, negotiate, and build. Calculated use of force. But changing language without changing action becomes just motivational illusion. Because in the end, a strong identity isn't born solely from positive thinking. It's born when someone directs energy towards something that improves with practice, has personal meaning, and also generates real value for other people. There's a huge difference between being busy and building something valuable. Many people work all day, feel extremely tired, but ultimately continue going in circles. And this happens because action without direction becomes an elegant waste of energy. Machiavelli understood that poorly positioned force quickly loses efficiency. Calculated use of force. It's not enough to act desperately. Action needs to point towards something that has three characteristics simultaneously: potential for continuous improvement, genuine emotional connection, and perceived market value. Policy guided by reality, not by ideals, because there are people extremely passionate about things that almost no one wants to pay for, and there are people chasing lucrative markets that they deeply hate. Neither extreme usually lasts long. The strategic point is at the intersection. When someone finds something they can evolve over time, enjoy developing, and also helps other people, they begin to enter a rare zone of sustainable growth. And it's curious to observe this in practice. A content creator who loves communication can spend hours studying storytelling without feeling the same emotional exhaustion as someone who does it only out of obligation. The energy changes, the consistency changes, the ability to withstand difficulties also changes. The problem is that most people try to choose paths based solely on quick money or immediate security, and that's where a dangerous detail comes in. Consistent wealth usually requires depth, your own loyal armies. The market rewards those who develop rare skills combined with the ability to generate clear transformation. An excellent copywriter can multiply company sales. A highly humane doctor builds a powerful reputation. An editor who understands retention becomes a strategic asset in any digital operation. Decisions based on real human nature. The more someone improves in something that generates economic impact, the more valuable they become. And this creates an interesting effect. True passion usually doesn't appear ready-made. It grows along with competence. A young man starts editing videos just to make money. Months later, he discovers a fascination with narrative, rhythm, visual emotion, and the psychology of retention. Skill deepens interest. Virtù and fortuna. Luck begins to favor those who spend enough time improving something useful. And while many jump from opportunity to opportunity seeking miraculous shortcuts, strategically patient people build silent mastery in specific areas. But here's a point that almost no one talks about. Not every lucrative activity deserves your entire life. It's better to be feared than loved. Sometimes growth requires the courage to abandon paths that bring money but drain identity, energy, and purpose. Because wealth without inner alignment often creates emptiness masked as success. Constant adaptability. The strategically intelligent individual learns to observe not only how much this pays, but who am I becoming while doing this? And this question completely changes the game. Because little by little, they realize that true financial building happens in seemingly small and even tedious daily cycles. Reading 20 pages, prospecting clients, improving communication, studying human behavior, saving part of the profit, adjusting processes, simple habits, repeated in an almost banal way, and that's precisely where many people fail without realizing it. Almost everyone is looking for a secret strategy, an explosive opportunity, or some sophisticated trick capable of completely transforming their life overnight. But reality is usually much less cinematic and much more powerful precisely because of that. Machiavelli understood that great empires were rarely sustained by impulsive movements. They were built through strategic consistency, their own loyal armies. Small actions repeated over years create results that seem absurd to outside observers. The problem is that simple habits don't generate immediate excitement. Reading daily seems banal. Saving part of your income seems small. Prospecting for clients every day seems repetitive. Gradually improving communication seems slow. And precisely because it seems too simple, most people ignore it. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. People prefer exciting fantasies to effective routines. They want to get rich quickly, but they can't maintain consistency even for 30 consecutive days. And so they live trapped in an eternal cycle of momentary motivation followed by silent abandonment. The most curious thing is to realize that many extremely successful individuals lead almost boring lives at their structural base, because they understood that wealth doesn't just come from intensity, it comes primarily from intelligent repetition. Imagine someone who reads 20 pages a day for 5 years. It seems like little at first, but over time, that person absorbs hundreds of ideas, mental models, and strategies that begin to silently alter their decisions. A man who consistently saves part of what he earns builds freedom without realizing it. A content creator who publishes even without initial recognition develops skill while others give up emotionally. Virtù and fortuna. Luck begins to seem miraculous when viewed from the outside, but there is almost always an invisible mountain of repetition sustaining the result. Decisions based on real human nature. The human brain loves novelty, dopamine, and quick reward. That's why simple habits seem difficult to maintain, not because they are complex, but because they don't offer instant excitement. Does the end justify the means? In wealth building, the most powerful means is often precisely what no one wants to repeat long enough. Reading books like Think and Grow Rich, The Psychology of Finance, The Richest Man in Babylon, or The 48 Laws of Power doesn't change your life in a week, but it can completely alter the way someone thinks over the years. And consistent thinking inevitably changes behavior. But perhaps there's an even deeper truth hidden in all of this. Simple discipline doesn't just transform your bank account, it transforms your identity, constant adaptability. When someone learns to keep small promises made to themselves daily, they begin to build real inner confidence, and that changes posture, communication, courage, and vision for the future. Better to be feared than loved, because at some point, the person realizes that the world respects consistency much more than unstable talent. While many live searching for secret shortcuts, strategically patient individuals continue to accumulate knowledge, skills, reputation, and assets silently. And then something almost inevitable happens. One day, the result appears so great that others call it luck, a gift or a privilege, without realizing that it started years before, in habits so simple that they seem too small to matter. Now the question is no longer, is it possible to get rich? But becomes much more uncomfortable. What exactly is preventing you from starting? Because after all this, it's difficult to continue believing that the problem is simply a lack of opportunity. The world has never had so much access to information, tools, markets, and possibilities. What remains rare is strategic courage. Machiavelli understood that most people prefer the emotional security of excuses to the psychological risk of transformation. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. And perhaps that's exactly where entire lives end up being silently wasted, because wealth doesn't just come from money. It's born first in how someone thinks, speaks, decides, and acts every day, in the simple habits that no one values, in the skills built in silence, in the willingness to endure discomfort while others give up too soon. It's better to be feared than loved. At some point, you'll need to choose between continuing to seek approval or finally building the life you know you could have. And that choice almost never seems comfortable at first. But the truth is that standing still also has a price. And sometimes it's much higher than the risk of trying. So answer me this honestly. What was the biggest belief about money that you realized was controlling your life? What skill do you already possess today, but haven't yet turned into an opportunity? And most importantly, who could you become in a few years if you started now, even without feeling completely confident? Write in the comments below. I want to understand what resonated most with you in this video. And if this content opened your mind in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because in the next videos, you'll understand more and more how power, human behavior, strategy, and wealth really work, far from the illusions that most people accept without question. Virtù and fortuna favor those who decide to enter the game.